Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending the 2020 AMA Summer Academic Conference and for joining us today in today's session. Representation Matters, Scholars of Color at the Front of the Classroom. My name is Kevin Bradford, and I'm Associate Professor of Teaching at the Paul Merage School of Business at the University of California, Irvine. As a member of the AMA Board of Directors and an advocate of the PhD project, the representation of people of color in marketing academia is a topic both relevant and personal to me. I've been associated with the PhD project since the fall of 1995 and with MDSA since its inception. My affiliation truly began when I met other African American PhD students at a dinner at a competing conference. At that moment, we developed a cohesive cohort. The friendships cultivated, the professional aspirations, examples that I was exposed to, and the exposure to similar plights and experiences assisted me in providing myself with confidence that I could achieve in this profession and a vision of what professional life could be and should be. I just want to take a couple of seconds to provide a couple of specific examples. These stand out because they involve two people who are considered giants in our profession, especially as it pertains to this issue. And this is tough to share because a lot of personal support is sensitive and nuanced, but actually that is the point. My colleagues in PhD Project provide personal and professional attention, caring advice, and wise and creative insights into situations that you might find yourself in. One personal and shining example in my life is the access to this professional, the support that he provided, and the confidence that he bestowed in me, and that is by Jerome Williams. I had a situation where I was at a professional crossroads and needed support. This man gave of himself way beyond expectation, up to the point where he saw to it that I was taken care of in a way that he thought was sufficient. It was his all-in, 100% support that changed my perspective on what it means to mentor in this space. The other example I want to share with you is from Professor Qualls, who again supported me with resources and knowledge that I didn't even know existed. He went above and beyond what I expected or even thought was possible. It was one of those things that when you're going through it, you just kind of roll with it. But as I reflect on it, and I reflect on his support, his mentorship, his personal attention, he looms Herculean in my mind, in my career. The thing that I receive most joy from all of this is the pride and the joy that I see in both Jerome, Bill, and Bill's faces as they smile and survey MDSA when they attend. You know, they laid this foundation for all of this success. I can say that the PhD project has affected my life in a profoundly positive way. And these are just two of a multitude of examples that I have to provide justification for my continued commitment to PhD project. I urge all students who can join MDSA and the PhD project to do so. Today, we'll recognize the 2020 Williams Qualls Spratlin WQS Award and Valuing Diversity PhD Scholarship recipients. But before that, I'm honored to present a Q&A video with the founders of the WQS Award, Jerome Williams, Bill Qualls, and Thaddeus H. Spratlin. These marketing scholars, educators, and mentors of color are trailblazers who came along before the marketing academic community was receptive to marketing professors from underrepresented backgrounds. Professors Williams, Qualls, and Spratlin represent the pioneers who laid the foundation for those of us in academia today. The WQS Multicultural Mentoring Award of Excellence carries on their legacy and recognizes the outstanding mentors in the marketing community in the mold of Williams, Qualls, and Spratlin. Gina, can you show the video?
Hello, my name is Dr. Brittany Martin with the American Marketing Association. Welcome to our panel discussion titled Representation Matters, Scholars of Color at the Front of the Classroom. We have three outstanding speakers. Jerome D. Williams, Distinguished Professor and Prudential Chair in Business, Rutgers Business School, Newark and New Brunswick. William Qualls, Professor of Marketing, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Thaddeus Spradlin, Emeritus Professor of Marketing at the Foster School of Business, University of Washington. Now, I'd like to take a moment for each of you to introduce yourselves.
I received my PhD in the mid-'80s, and my first academic job was at Penn State University, where I was on the faculty for about 14 years. But I've also had the opportunity to be on the faculty at the University of Texas, at Rutgers University, and I've also had the opportunity of being on the faculty as a visiting professor at universities overseas. In fact, Bill Qualls had been a visiting professor at a university in Singapore, and he opened up that opportunity for me, and I followed suit, and then later on took a position there as a visiting professor. I've really enjoyed that. My current position is at Rutgers University. I've been a distinguished professor for a number of years. I hold an endowed chair, which I've also held endowed chairs at other universities, such as the Wharton Business School, where I was the first Whitney Young professor, and then endowed chairs at Texas and Howard. But at Rutgers, the thing that really has, for me, blossomed my career is that this was the only university in my career where I've been at where there's been a significant number of faculty of color. In fact, if you look at the statistics, Rutgers University probably has more faculty of color than any other university in the country in the business school, except for HBCUs. And so I'm really pleased to have been a part of that, and to not only have an opportunity to promote that, but also as an administrator. One of the things I'm most proud of is to institute something in our tenure process called publicly engaged scholarship, which recognizes not only traditional scholarship, but recognizes work that has an impact on the public. And I think the work on race and ethnicity falls in that to a large extent.
I'm Bill Qualls. I'm currently a professor emeritus of marketing at the University of Illinois. Been in academia for over 40 years. My PhD from Indiana University, and my area of research is in new product and innovation, at least for the last 20 years or so. Been in a number of different institutions, both in the US and around the world, and I've had an opportunity to work with some tremendous scholars, and luckily, one or two have been people of color.
I've been at the University of Washington for most of my career, and I have interest in racial and economic inequality, basically a kind of a marketing and society interest. But since retirement in 2002, I've devoted most of my work to reaching and serving underserved communities.
Okay, perfect. Let's begin the Q&A component. The William Qualls Spradlin WQS Multicultural Mentoring Award of Excellence recognizes, encourages, and rewards outstanding mentors of people of color in the academic marketing community. What motivated you to establish this award?
At the time we conceived of the award, we were trying to find something that would be an appropriate award for particularly scholars of color. At the time, I was chairing the AMA Foundation board, and so we looked at all the existing awards, and there were awards for best paper, there were best conference paper awards, there was lifetime achievement awards, and all other types of awards to recognize scholarly achievement. But we felt mentoring was such an important aspect that hadn't been recognized. So I actually went to Bill and said, what do you think about that? And he came up with this idea, and then we went to Thad and brought him in, and that's really how this whole idea was conceived.
Well, I would say the success of the PhD project, which certainly has demonstrated the importance of mentoring and collaboration. And then we had our own personal experiences with, for me, it was a scholar by the name of Marcus Alexis. Even though he was a peer, he was also my mentor. So we realized that to be competitive in the academic environment and publication and research, that you need a community. And we thought that mentoring is the best way to nurture that community. And we're pleased that the AMA has supported the William Qualls Spradlin Award.
The title of this session is Representation Matters, Scholars of Color at the Front of the Classroom. In your experience, what are the resources that could help more doctoral students of color complete their programs and get published? And how can mentors play a role?
So as you begin your doctoral programs or your careers as assistant professors, there are a number of resources that you now have available to you that was not available when I first came along. And that would be people who are willing and able to mentor you as academic scholars. My first experience with mentoring came by way of a conference, actually in Singapore. And as you normally do at the meet and greet, you go around and meet different people. And I saw this young man across the hall, and he had this loud shirt, which was a Hawaiian print. And I went to introduce myself, expecting him to be from Singapore and of Malaysian descent. And lo and behold, what I heard was a West Philly accent. And it was Jerome Williams. And it was from that point on that we began to mentor each other. And I found him tremendously helpful throughout my career. And hopefully to him, I've been as equally important in terms of his career. But a mentor can play an important role in terms of sometimes just being there to talk to and share experiences with. And that's more on a personal level. But you also need to make use of the faculty members at your institution. So one of the first things I would do as you began your programs or began your career is get to know all the other faculty members in marketing. Take them out for coffee, for a Coke, iced tea, and just to get to know them on a personal level, what their interests are, and maybe how your interests can combine with them. Those 1 or 2 hours that you may spend may be very helpful in helping you to identify a potential mentor among the faculty there at your particular institution. They will help, if from a research perspective, help you to get published because they will help you learn how to get published. Becoming involved in their research program may give you access to data and opportunities to create and share your ideas. But interacting with your fellow faculty members would be one resource. The other resource would be faculty members at other institutions or other doctoral students at other institutions. You should make time to get to know other people and share your thoughts, your ideas with those particular people who could also serve as mentors. So mentoring is an important process that we felt was so important it needed to be associated with an award, and that was the impetus for the WQS Award.
WQS award recipients have accomplished advanced research and education on issues where racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity intersect with the discipline and practice of marketing. What are the issues you think face the next generation of marketing educators of color?
The history of marketing scholarship, race, ethnicity typically have not been emphasized in our research. But we're at a pivotal time now in race relations. You take the events of George Floyd's death, the Black Lives Matter events, and there's a lot of attention being focused in this area. And right now, it's critical that we look at the area of race, ethnicity, not only historically, but going forward. There's a lot of research now that younger scholars are getting to put an emphasis on, and we're trying to encourage that. So I think going forward, the journals are going to be more receptive. Dissertation chairs are going to be more receptive to scholars doing work in this area. I noted that right now, some of our major journals are already developing special issues devoted to race and ethnicity. So it's important that we keep that in mind as we move forward. This will be an opportunity that many had shied away from in the past, but I think could be a great opportunity going forward.
Well, I think that encouraging collaboration, the recognizing that increasingly to be competitive, it's necessary to have multiple authorship in publications. And so any of the collaborative ways of supporting research, validating and the work in whatever area of interest, that will be, individuals will be more successful when they have the kind of support that can be gained through the PhD project, through the AMA's efforts, and especially what we recognize in the William Qualls Spradlin Award.
For the purposes of the WQS Award, mentoring is defined as the process of guiding, supporting, and promoting the training and career development of others. What actions or criteria, in your opinion, create a positive role model and mentor?
One of the first things that I looked for when I was, looking for a mentor were people who was willing to give up their time. And I respected that time by trying not to waste that time. But I think a good mentor is willing and available to spend time with you no matter when it occurs. It could be during the regular office hours from 8 to 5. It could be after you're on campus. It could be on the weekend. It could be a telephone call. It could be a face-to-face meeting. But it'd be some combination of someone who is willing to share their time with you, and they don't feel it's a waste of their time because they're giving back to you in terms of your development as an academic scholar. Now, there are other things that you want to look for in a mentor, but I think the best way of doing that is to identify multiple mentors. You want to identify someone who can help you with your research. You can identify someone who can help you with your teaching. And then even more important is someone that you are willing to share and discuss your personal life with, your ups and downs, your challenges. Someone who's willing to listen and not necessarily tell you what to do, but guide you towards the particular appropriate decisions that you make that best fits your career. So when you're seeking out mentors, make sure you spend time identifying people that you're willing to spend time with.
I think I would emphasize in all of this the importance of congenial, caring relationships in which faculty establish the trust and confidence with doctoral students, young faculty, and in that process, again, it's an extension of collaboration, but I think it's more personal than that. That is, it's a shared confidence and encouragement from those who are more senior.
Lastly, what advice do you have for underrepresented groups, particularly African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Native Americans, just beginning their academic career?
I would say several points. Get to know your key faculty members and especially their interest in your work, as well as theirs. Try to find an ally and not a champion among the mid-level and senior faculty, but especially making sure that people know that you're serious, talented, and productive. Build on your dissertation and design a research agenda. But most importantly, get the best advice that you can from the department chair on how you're doing as you're making progress.
As you begin to start your career, either as a doctoral student or as a faculty member, you need to look at this as a marathon and not a sprint, which means that it will take time. You need to have patience. There will be a lot of ups, there'll be a lot of downs. But remember, each hurdle is a hurdle towards the development of you as a doctoral student or you as a faculty member. One of the things I saw among newly minted faculty is that they often think they're defending they've arrived, but there's still approximately 6 to 10 more years of hard work that's necessary to get to the level where you can begin to help others. And the idea of your going through the tenure process is to make sure you get to a stage where you're among the senior faculty that can influence policy or strategies for achieving success within that institution. And so as you come out, you can't take a break during that first year. Many faculty members I see think that they have enough time that they do not meet the challenge of attacking their first 1 or 2 years the same way they may have gone through their doctoral program. But remember, it takes approximately 18 months to get something under review. And at the end of that tenure process, typically 6 years, you need anywhere from 6 to 10 manuscripts that have been accepted at the quality journals for your particular institution. And focusing on the quality journals is important, and making sure you focus on the research that you know and not doing the research of others. So you may want to narrow your focus down to 1 or 2 program areas such that you can target the best research for those journals. You know, it takes as much time to write for a B-level journal as it does for an A-level. So you might as well start out your career focusing on an A level. And then if necessary, you can go back to a B level. Now, my view is very much colored by being at a research institution for over 40 years. It may be different at your institution. So you need to learn the rules of the game at your institution. But one rule that you can always live by is that if you make yourself marketable in terms of your beta, in other words, making sure that you have what's necessary to get that next job, you're going to be viewed as valuable at your own institution. At any time in which you feel the need to move on, you will also have the necessary record to be successful at your institution. So you should limit any other activities that's not geared toward that long-term survival of being a tenured senior faculty member at your institution, and focus on those elements that will get you to that particular point. You need to enjoy the ride, of course. Make sure you spend enough time with your family, and you also need to enjoy what you're doing. And even after 40 years of being in academia, I don't think there's any other position as enjoyable as being a faculty member.
Great. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to add before we conclude today?
The things that we've talked about today are really important for young scholars. They're at a pivotal time and where they can take their scholarship and move in a direction that really puts emphasis on race and ethnicity. Not that that should be what scholars of color should pursue. I think there's a lot of contributions that can be made because we've neglected this area in the past. I think the most important thing, and really the impetus for this WQS award, is the mentoring. So by building upon the foundation of the scholars that preceded them, like Bill and Thad preceded me, and I was able to build upon their work. And then now that the three of us are getting close to our twilight years of our career, it's a time for these younger scholars to build upon the foundation that we've established, continue to move forward. And I think that as I look to the future, they'll make even greater contributions than we've been able to make, because there are many, many more opportunities that are opening up to scholars of color.
There's always opportunities for you to carry on this conversation with either one of us. And I invite you to email me and contact me if you have other questions. But I want to take this time to thank you for at least sharing my thoughts and the thoughts of Jerome Williams and Thad Spradlin on why we think mentoring is important and how you might benefit from being mentored by someone in the field. And you should take the opportunity to make sure you mentor others as well. Thank you.
Yes, given the importance of mentoring in our profession increasingly, given the importance of it as a vehicle or a process for encouraging collaboration, encouraging the development of community and building on strengths. This requires financial investment, and we encourage anyone who really wants to be supportive of this effort to really support the diversity initiatives and efforts. And I would, on behalf of my colleagues, it's great to be a part of the Williams Qualls Spratling Award process, and we appreciate all that AMA does to further this, and your contributions, of course, will help to increase our success. And we thank you clearly for any support that you provide.
Thank you so much, Jerome, Bill, and Thad, for giving us your time and sharing such great information. We hope to see the WQS Award continue to grow, and we want to thank you so much for contributing to the field of marketing the way that you have. So everyone, please have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you at the next session.
If you would like to honor the legacy of Jerome, Bill, and Thaddeus, please text AMA to 56512. To donate to the WQS Award, visit the AMA Foundation website. Introducing this year's award recipient and moderating the panel is Dr. Terry Esper, Associate Professor of Logistics in the Department of Marketing and Logistics at the Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University. Additionally, Dr. Esper is the 2018 recipient of the WQS Award. Dr. Esper.
Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm indeed honored to be with you today to recognize the giants of Williams, Qualls, and Spratling, as well as engage in dialogue around the topics of race, diversity, and inclusion, and that we just heard stated so eloquently by these giants. We're facing these issues today and hearing from young and emerging scholars about how they feel about these topics as they're starting their careers. But before we get into the panel, it is my honor to acknowledge this year's recipient of the WQS Award, the very deserving Dr. Vanessa Perry. Vanessa is Associate Dean for Faculty and Professor of Marketing, Strategic Management and Public Policy at George Washington University's School of Business. Vanessa?
Thank you so much, Terry, Dr. Esper. I just want to say how honored I am to be a recipient of this award. I very much see myself still as a student and a mentee of Bill, Jerome, and Thad. As you've just seen, they're still sharing their wise counsel and advice and encouragement and support, not just to me, but to us all. And so what I've tried to do over this 20-year period since they started mentoring me is to share some of their wisdom and kind support and encouragement to others. That's all I hope to do and hope to continue to do.
Thank you, Vanessa. Dr. Perry. Before then, we have to acknowledge three additional emerging scholars who I'm really excited to talk about today. So in partnership with the PhD Project and thanks to the generosity of Sage Publications, the Valuing Diversity PhD Scholarship Program seeks to widen the opportunities for underrepresented populations to attend marketing doctoral programs. And this year we recognize three recipients of the PhD Valuing Diversity Scholarship. And they are Wendy De La Rosa from Stanford University, Samantha Galvan from the University of Texas at San Antonio, and Jen Riley from Kennesaw State University. I'm going to ask each of these young ladies to provide us with a brief overview of how they feel about receiving this scholarship. And we will start with Wendy De La Rosa. Wendy?
Thank you, Dr. Esper. For me, I feel extremely honored to be receiving this award, especially in this critical time where, at least in the U.S., there's a reckoning and an increasing value on diversity and the importance of diversifying our field. So it is with great honor that I accept this award, and I also feel honored to share it with two amazing research ladies who will speak next. Thank you, Dr. Esper.
Thank you. Samantha?
Yes, I'm very grateful to be receiving this scholarship. It's going to allow me to continue with my research. And I'm just so happy that AMA and the PhD project continue to work on supporting students and faculty of color. And I'm also really grateful for the support that I've gotten from my institution, from University of Texas at San Antonio. So thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Jen.
This award means the world to me. I take my position in front of the classroom and the position of people of color and various minorities in front of the classroom very seriously. I believe so strongly that representation matters. So I feel so honored to get this award and be able to continue the legacy of those that have come in front of me. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jen.
So let's engage in some dialogue. In addition to Vanessa and I as the current and former WQS Award recipients, and of course our Valuing Diversity recipients, we also have with us today Dr. Tiffany White, who is Associate Professor of Business Administration and the Bruce and Ann Strom Faculty Fellow at the University of Illinois. Tiffany, thank you so much for being with us today. Tiffany is the 2019 WQS Award recipient.
A pleasure to be here.
All right. So in addition to the great insights that were provided by Dr. Williams, Qualls, and Spratlin as it relates to their starting the WQS Award, recognizing that there was a need for more targeted and focused conversation around issues of diversity and inclusion and mentorship in the academic community within marketing. We still have conversations to engage in about matters of diversity and inclusion. And this time, as you alluded to, Wendy, is particularly important as we think about the many tough conversations that we have had to have in this country, in most cases precipitated by the untimely death of George Floyd, but how this moment that we see kind of unfolding before us. In many ways, we've tried to take this moment and leverage it for a movement. And in doing so, we have seen some really interesting things happen within boardrooms and within classrooms across this country. And so let's start from there and engage in some conversations around these issues in the academy. And I'd like to first start by acknowledging the project and all the great work that it has done. And of course, we saw that emerge as we listened to founders of the WQS Award. And we've made significant strides as it relates to diversifying the classroom and diversifying the academy within marketing. But we have some work to do. And as we think about the work that yet still remains, I think in many ways it kind of revolves around this idea of inclusion. So we celebrate the increased diversity that we have through the work of the PhD project and its relationship with organizations like AMA. But yet we still see issues related to inclusion. And so, Tiffany, I'm going to start with you. I have a question to maybe pose in your direction. What are some of your thoughts about inclusion right? So a lot of times diversity and inclusion get thrown together. The concepts are actually quite different. What are your thoughts about inclusion, and in particular, your thoughts as it relates to maybe some impediments that we have seen over the years that might serve as impediments to a more inclusive community of marketing scholars?
Thank you, Terry. I appreciate your comments and for acknowledging, as I do, the great work that's been done already to increase awareness and interest in marketing academics in the last couple of decades. That's really going to help universities who are truly committed to diversifying their applicant pool. It's going to give them a bigger pool from which to draw. But as you mentioned, being invited to a dance is not really the same as being asked to dance. So in other words, diversity isn't always the same, and it isn't necessarily the same as inclusion. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some issues that I think specifically relate to people of color in general, and maybe African Americans in particular, that are particularly detrimental, I think, to the goal of being and feeling included in the field. And I'll just say that when those situations exist, not feeling like you are included, I think my overall thesis is that robs the field of getting the best of that outcome that you can from diversity. So one of the things I want to talk about is just the implicit and sometimes even explicit belief that we have, that we seem to have, that diversity and quality require some sort of a trade-off. So when search committees are, it's as though search committees are asking themselves, do we hire a diverse candidate or do we hire the best athlete, as though these two can't be one and the same. Or it's thinking, all right, let's hire our favorite non-underrepresented minority candidate using our regular faculty lines and use maybe the university, some of their targeted money to hire a diverse candidate. And while that's maybe solid economic logic, it also sets the tone right away that the free or cheap diversity hire labor is of inherently less quality and therefore value. And that's not only unfair to the candidate that you hire, it's also not without psychological cost. The burden of being a diversity hire isn't inspiring. It's not, especially when you believe that the university wouldn't have otherwise hired you. It's not inspiring, it's not empowering. It causes a mental load that you have to carry while still, by the way, doing all the excellent work of being a marketing scholar. And speaking of work, there's also the differential burden of service. So we call that out as a separate issue. As an African-American woman, I don't have to tell you that I'm an EO officer's dream in terms of ticking off diversity boxes. And so for sure, I'm going to get asked to be on more search committees. I'm going to be asked to serve on advisory committees. I'm going to be asked to be in photo shoots. I'm going to be asked spending time mentoring and listening to and mothering underrepresented minority students who are feeling like they're victims of microaggressions from their fellow peers or even their professors. And I'm not saying that to complain, because that's in many ways what I signed up for. I want to be at the table for the search committee hiring. I want to be a mentor to the students. But it is worth saying that the differential burden of this invisible service, until it gets acknowledged and valued by administrators and those who are truly in power, then I have to wake up every day having to do more and be more in those types of situations than colleagues who don't have to or choose not to. There's two more things I want to bring up as quickly as I can. The third one has to do with this notion of power. And my observation that people of color, Blacks specifically, simply don't seem to have very much in this field. So not as presidents of organizations, not as associate editors, not as editors, not as members of campus-wide promotion and tenure committees, certainly not as full professors. And every time I get the soapbox, I encourage people to try to figure out how and why there's shockingly few African-American women who are full or chair professors. But what the lack of power means is that people of color often lack access to or acknowledgement by the formal and informal communities of power that really run our field. So they're not getting as much access to folks who take a special interest in inviting them for research collaborations, that are going to write them letters for promotion and tenure, that are going to nominate them for awards, that are going to be judging those awards. And all of these kinds of informal gifts are often taken for granted by others who are not underrepresented, but they actually explain a non-trivial amount of variance in their success equation. And that actually leads me to my last point, which is probably the most insidious, even if I think really it happens unintentionally. And it is this deadly combination of obliviousness, indifference, and apathy by many of our colleagues who are not underrepresented. So it's I refer to it as the casual breeze through time and space, through which people who are not in power, who are in power and not underrepresented, they're just unbothered, they're unburdened, and they oftentimes don't even realize that there is inequity or injustice in the field. And that can manifest itself through a number of means. It can be insisting that academia is a meritocracy, so let the person with the most A-level publications win, when in fact, academia is not always a meritocracy, nor is getting published in the A-level journals. It can be surrounding yourself with people who you think are fun to work and be around, when it's well established that we often tend to default to people who are most like us. The list goes on, and I'll stop there, but I wanted to lay some ideas out and that are going to get the conversation started, the quick conversation. I'm happy to discuss more, but when you ask about key impediments to a more inclusive community of diverse marketing scholars, the quality bias, invisible service, lack of access or a seat at the table where change and influence are happening, and motivated or unmotivated indifference by those who are not underrepresented strike me as four that deserve acknowledgement and attention.
Wow, thank you so much, Tiffany. So much good, rich content, many things to unpack. And of course, with a session like this, we won't be able to probably peel back the layers of the onion of all of those, but those are just such great great foundational issues that we oftentimes face as faculty of color. And sometimes, persons that are not in the underrepresented communities may not necessarily acknowledge or even be able to acknowledge. So let's talk about this. But before we move on, is there anyone else that wanted to maybe add to this list that Tiffany has provided us with as it relates to potential impediments or things that you have acknowledged as impediments to a more inclusive community of marketing scholars? Okay, well, let's jump in. So I'm going to go next because Tiffany, one of the things you mentioned was the service burden and this notion, carrying a lot of opportunities to serve in a number of capacities, and that in many cases, those opportunities to serve, or even some of the smaller things that you mentioned, take photos or to serve as a mentor, that are seemingly small things, but they can have a time. Service, a larger conversation that we've been having, this notion of representation has not only been representation in the classroom, but also representation in the ranks of business schools. And Tiffany, you alluded to that, right, when you talked about communities of power. So Vanessa, you're an associate dean, and you've also served in administration at the university level. I'd like to maybe blend those two concepts, the social service, because a lot of times faculty of color get tapped to serve in administrative capacities, maybe sometimes earlier than other activities. Again, as an activity, as a service opportunity, and in many ways, the goal is to try to enhance diversity of the administrative echelon of the business school. So in many ways, and oftentimes it becomes somewhat of a catch-22, right? We want to diversify administration, but that oftentimes requires that we maybe start grooming potential administrators earlier in their career to put them on track to administration. So Vanessa, I'd like to maybe get your thoughts as someone who is in administration on this conundrum of serving, but also wanting to maybe diversify those communities of power that Tiffany talked about.
So thanks, Terry, for the question. I'll try to build on what Tiffany laid out, but many of the issues are the same. So I will just say that, yes, we are, those of us who are coming from sort of minority groups are less likely to be represented, and so we are going to be tapped for all kinds of service roles. And what happens, and many of us have corporate backgrounds and other kinds of backgrounds that also very much lend themselves to having a sort of good management, strategic sort of ways of thinking, more so. And so we get asked to serve in a variety of capacities. It always starts with a search committee, and then it's, can you chair the search committee? And then it turns into department chair, and then from there, it goes on to many other things. And I will say, from a personal perspective, I had no interest in ever being an administrator, ever, at all. I was bullied into becoming a department chair the first go round. I've been bullied into a number, can you believe me, bullied, into a couple of other roles. The role that I have now is one that I actually was interested in, and I actually enjoy. And the reason why is because of the power piece. Because as I saw, after 20 years as a faculty member in this industry, I saw things that I thought needed to change. One of the things, and I'll just pick this one as an example, is sort of faculty recruitment and faculty composition. I served as vice provost for diversity and inclusion at the university level for a year on an interim basis. And what I learned is that our students of color really, really were not having the same experience that other students were having, despite all of the efforts that the university had made to recruit them and all of that. That just wasn't happening. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. And one of the things I realized is that until there are people in administration that can actually shape the university and what the identity of the university and the strategy of the university, then we're just going to keep going through the same cycle of bringing students in, they leave, they don't do as well as possibly they could because they encounter a system, an environment that they're not necessarily comfortable in or that doesn't necessarily embrace them. So I got into this role to try to do what I could to do that. And in order to get into that role and to really be effective, I also had to go through the kind of traditional academic pipeline, because otherwise it's sort of hard to get the respect. The universities are controlled by faculty. If you're not a faculty member, if you're not a respected faculty member, you can pretty much forget about it. People have tried, and every once in a while someone ekes through that doesn't have that background, but in general that tends to be the case. So, but I'll say just a couple of other things and then I'll stop talking. I think I would expand on some points that Tiffany made. I will just say that I think it is time that we all start rethinking the language that we use and the way that we look at the academic industry and pipeline. So there was a study done by somebody that 50% of business school professors come from 16 schools. And those are considered, the premier prestigious doctoral PhD in business schools, which is great. But let's face it, none of that list of 16 includes traditionally Hispanic serving institutions or HBCUs. And, those institutions may have a different focus, but I hear people talk about institutions as if excellence only resides in these top research institutions, which we're either at one or we all try to emulate. And that is something that we really need to think about, because that system, the system very much exacerbates the social inequality that exists. Both racial and ethnic and other kinds of inequality get preserved because the truth is it's very, very difficult for a variety of reasons to even have access to those institutions as a student and certainly not as a faculty member. And then, since everybody wants to hire, I say everybody, I'm really talking about schools like mine that are not in the sort of those echelons, but we'd love to be, want to hire people from those institutions. That it is much our pool of potential faculty comes from these same institutions, and so this cycle continues, and that has to do with sort of just the way the entire system works is really not set up for inclusion, and until we are inclusive at the sort of decision-making levels and the allocation of resources levels, then we're not going to probably see a whole lot of change and increases in inclusion at these institutions.
Thank you for those thoughts, Vanessa, and thank you for leading the charge and stepping into that administrative role, the administrative roles that you have over the years. And thank you for being bullied into administration, as you are at least one of the persons that are on the front line and making change as it relates to all those things you discussed. One of the things that Dr. Williams mentioned earlier was this idea of more research on issues of race and diversity. So a lot of times when we talk about this issue of diversity and inclusion in matters of race, a lot of times we're talking about the makeup of faculty. But another big part of this conversation has to do with just the scholarship, right? The research and engaging in research efforts that are specifically focused on and keenly investigating issues and matters of race and racism and diversity and inclusion in the marketplace. And one of the issues that comes up oftentimes when we talk about this issue is the pervasive discouragement away from doing research on those topics, particularly for new and budding scholars that are interested in these topics, and a lot of times, find themselves faced with a faculty member that says, no, migrate away from that or think differently. So let's unpack that a little bit, because that's another one of these big conversation points as it relates to matters of race and diversity in the marketing academic community. And I actually want to go to Wendy on this, because Wendy, you were the most recent past president of the Marketing Doctoral Student Association through PhD Project. And your own research deals with several, certain communities within the marketplace. And so I'm curious as to your thoughts on this topic of inclusion from a research perspective and this notion of the discouragement away from research that deals specifically with issues of race and diversity.
Thank you, Dr. Esper. I think one of the things that we heard from Dr. Williams during our MDSA conference was that even when he was a doctoral student, he was actively discouraged from studying race in the marketplace, because I think we have this stereotype that this type of research may not be as rigorous or may not be as important enough. And in fact, one of the professors at Stanford, Dr. Stephen Roberts, recently published a paper looking back at all published papers in psychology from the 1970s, how many of them had race at the center of it. And for cognitive psychology journals, it was less than 1%. And that number didn't move over 30 years. For all other psychology fields, whether it was cognitive or developmental, it was less than 10%. And again, that number remained slightly unchanged since the 1970s. And one of the things, going back to what Dr. White was highlighting, was who is in the positions of power. And so what this research showed was that editors who are white and male, one, tend to publish less articles based on race, but also less articles from non-people of color. Now, whether that's implicit or explicit, right, we don't know. But I think it's important for us to understand that at least at the academic journal, it is not like we've had this great support to do research about a topic that, quite frankly, is probably the number one topic that many of you have been talking about, given everything that's happened this year. And the reality is that the majority of consumers around the world are not white. 40% of US consumers are not white. And the trends, if we want to really focus on marketing to all consumers, I think we have to really take a deep look into how we conduct research. There's been an awesome and great movement to try to get all researchers to justify their sample sizes. And I think that's so necessary. But what I don't see, and what I would encourage all researchers to do, is to justify the demographics of their sample size. Right? If we're trying to make claims that some of our underlying mechanisms is going to generalize to the US consumer, then we have to really understand then why are samples only 3, 5, 10% non-white. And I think that's probably an area where all of us, regardless of our area of research, can start. In fact, less than 15% of journals in psychology even cite the racial makeup of their participants. So I'll end there and just to say that if we really want to be honest about the study of consumers, about the study of judgment and decision making, about the psychology of consumers, I think then we have to be honest about the importance that race plays into that and encourage that type of research.
Wow, thank you. These are great points there. Thank you. You said there about justifying the makeup of our samples and really thinking more strategically and really more focused in a more focused manner about the makeup of our samples and the ways in which we execute research to ensure that the research that we're doing is representative of the face of the consumer communities that we're studying. So thank you so much for that very good and salient point there. So Vanessa, I liked a lot of things that you said a moment ago. One thing that you mentioned, and you were talking about this notion of recruiting faculty of color, primarily to address issues of students, and that students were requesting a certain experience, students of color that had certain levels of expectations as it relates to their experiences at George Washington, and then arriving on campus and not necessarily seeing a faculty that looked like them, which really gets to the core of this whole panel, this notion of representation matters and faculty of color in the classroom. So let's talk a little bit about the classroom and some of the issues that we face in the classroom. Not to pile on here, but I think it is important to acknowledge the unique and idiosyncratic issues that we face as faculty of color, because even with efforts to diversify faculty and even to address some of those underlying mechanisms that might serve as impediments to diversifying faculty, even if we achieve those things, we get in the classroom and sometimes there are still issues that are faced. And so, Jen, I know you just won a teaching award, and so I'll go to you with this, just this idea of some of the that we face when we enter into the classroom as faculty of color, and some of your thoughts as a new scholar just finishing your doctoral studies and arriving at Kansas State University. What are some of your thoughts about the issues that faculty of color?
Sure. Thank you so much. Teaching is a passion project for me, and I think that I've served in multiple faculty appointments, both before as a practitioner and even as a PhD student. And one thing that I saw that was pretty consistent between being in the front of the classroom and being in the classroom was just that desire and hunger for that mentorship. Even if you can align your research with a faculty member or you mesh with them on a personal level, there is still a lot of implicit bias that is an undertone to that. You can't necessarily ask for advice from somebody that they don't have the same experience as you. They did not have that work twice as hard to make it half as far mentality embedded in them. you still have to push forward, and that's why the value of having a litany of mentors comes into play, because you need to kind of piecemeal it at that point, where as a student as a minority. And then on the faculty side, I think you end up going above and beyond to help those that are look like you, to make sure that they have that opportunity, that they have those seats at different tables at every level. But it's also, I take it as my responsibility in both of those areas to kind of counter that implicit bias as well. So it's a matter of it's layered, right? You have the allyship of faculty members that don't necessarily look like you, and then you have to be that ally for students evenly, even if it's your instinct to give more to those that look like you, because you know that there's that implicit bias, and you know that they don't have all the opportunities and they don't have access to the table. So it's all really a balancing act in front of the classroom and as a student, in my experience.
Thank you, Jen. And Samantha, we had a prior conversation, and you made some really interesting points about the students and this notion of representation and supporting students and some of your personal experiences. I'm wondering if you might share a little bit of that as we talk about this notion of representation in the classroom.
Sure, I'm happy to. I teach at a Hispanic serving institution, and so some of the things that I always try to be aware of is, knowing that a large part of my students are Hispanic, and opening up about that part of my identity, and just being myself in front of the classroom, I think is important for them to feel like they can approach me and ask me for help with whatever it may be. And I always try to be as open as I can, letting them know that I'm always here to help, and with whatever. So that part has been really rewarding, and I hope that those students appreciate it. I certainly try to reach out as much as I can, and kind of open their eyes to to other opportunities that might be out there for them, because it wasn't until someone did that for me that I was able to pursue this as a career. And so I always try to take those lessons and pay it forward, basically.
Great. Thank you, Samantha. Thank you so much. Jen, you mentioned the term allyship and ally. And I'd like to circle back to that, and really for any of us that might have something to say about this. One of the things that's been really encouraging about this moment that we have been experiencing for the last several months has been this idea that, I live in downtown Columbus, in Ohio, and right out of this window, I see protesters. And, I look out my window, I don't just see Black and brown people. I see, people from all, that look like everyone. And so this is not just a conversation that is amongst persons of color, but this is a broader conversation. And we do have those allies that are a part of this narrative. And so recognizing all that we there could have been light bulb moments for persons that look like us, but maybe for folks that don't look like us. And so as we wind down here, this notion of allyship, really quickly, anyone have thoughts on what allyship means to you, and what is good allyship as we talk about scholarship and marketing academia? Anyone?
Oh, go ahead, Wendy.
I was just going to say, the service component that both Dr. Perry and Dr. White talked about is a real place where I think allyship would really matter. So, for example, in my institution, just looking at the MBAs, Black MBAs make up 5% of the population, but yet they make up 50% of the student government positions, meaning that they're serving my institution. That's a crazy disparity, and that just means that they're spending more time serving the institution than actually potentially receiving benefits from the institution. And I think that's a critical place. I would just say a couple of things that have been really encouraging for me serving as past MDSA president. I've seen lots of organizations think critically for the first time about the makeup of their organizations, the makeup of their leadership, how they even review applications to their conference. So for example, SJDM for the first time is instituting a double-blind review process. And so these are the ways, like recognizing, I think anti-racism work goes just past recognizing that there's a problem, but is the active and ongoing work at dismantling a system that you know is working against a particular population. And I think updating review processes, changing board makeups, changing editor makeups, all of that constitutes real allyship because we know that it will potentially lead to real change.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. Hey, Tiffany, I want to come back to you because I know we've got like a minute left. And, you started us off with so many great things that were on your mind as you think about some of those impediments. I guess as we circle back to this conversation about allyship and 1 minute on, your contribution to this notion of what does really good allyship look like as we think about trying to deal with some of those issues that you brought to the forefront.
So I have to say I agree with Wendy's eloquent explanation of just the real meat of allyship, which is action, which is understanding systemic, impediments to the success of that differentially burden one race of people or a group of people over another, and then doing the work, educating yourself, not making the people do the work, to educate you about racism, do the work yourself. But implement the policies, and when you have power, use it to dismantle systems that make life, make the playing field unfair. I think those are all my thoughts on it.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I'd like to thank everyone for being with us today. Tiffany, Vanessa, Wendy, Jen, Samantha, thank you so much for your time. I would, of course, be remiss if I didn't personally thank Dr. Williams, Qualls, and Spratling. I was so honored to be the 2018 recipient of the WQS Award and to be, amongst so many wonderful scholars that have also had this award bestowed upon them, and just to thank them for the legacy that they have laid out. The issues that we have brought to the table today, the reality is that, we can't solve all of these issues on a 40-minute panel discussion, but hopefully through these conversations, we have brought things that maybe folks didn't know or maybe didn't perhaps acknowledge. And for many of us, it just reminds us of why we do the work that we do, particularly as scholars of color. And so I'd like to again thank the AMA Foundation, the PhD Project for all the wonderful work that has been done down through the years to address these issues of diversity and inclusion. And I look forward to continuing to do the work. And so I'm excited about where we go from here. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to close us out. So thank you all for your engagement and for your participation today. Kevin?
Thank you, Dr. Esper. On behalf of the AMA Foundation, I want to thank each of the panelists for their participation and bringing their unique and valuable insights and expertise to the posed questions. Thank you, Dr. Esper, for leading us in tough discussion and providing us with leadership on interesting and important topics that have the potential to positively affect generations of people. This session will be available on demand throughout the remainder of the conference and following the conclusion of this event. The AMA Foundation sincerely appreciates the support of donors who have made the awards that you heard about today possible over the years. We are grateful for the continuing support to sustain these programs in the future, and we certainly appreciate all the attendees of this conference and especially this session. And so thank you And again, we appreciate you and thank you for your attendance. And we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.